the economic doctrine that we hear all the time, bandied about, is that, you know, incomes are determined by the natural forces of the marketplace, right? So we can't interfere in this natural phenomena. There's nothing natural about the workings of the marketplace. You know, they talk about it as if the marketplace is governed by kind of natural laws, like the laws of physics, the law of gravity or something. In fact, the marketplace is governed by laws that are man-made laws. They are, well, in fact, often made by men, but they are made by humans. And in fact, you change the laws a bit and you get very different income results. So for instance, the hedge fund managers who are making such a killing on Wall Street, they are doing that under the banking laws that prevail today. 30 years ago, we had very different banking laws, and it wasn't possible for the big players back then to make anywhere near what the players make today. Similarly, corporate CEOs making dramatically more today than they were back then. And the key reason for this is not that CEOs are more productive than their counterparts were in the past. The key reason is changes in the laws governing executive stock options, which have allowed their salaries to soar. In other words, incomes are determined by the particular laws in place at any particular time. But what determines those laws? Well, what determines them is which groups have power and therefore influence with government. So as the corporate elite has gotten more power and labor has lost power in the past 30 years, governments have increasingly passed laws favorable to business and unfavorable to labor. And we see the results today. Now, I think you can see how all this might apply to women, because, of course, women have traditionally been a group with kind of minimal power. And, you know, that's the reason that their pay has traditionally lagged behind men. But that began to change, of course, with the rise of feminism in the 1960s and 1970s, and the rise of political action on the part of women. And, of course, there was lots of protest over the fact that women were typically earning about 65% of what men were earning. And that protest and political organization on the part of women led the Trudeau government to bring in some minimal, but still some pay equity legislation in 1977. So there was some initial progress from all this kind of political activism, and women's salaries as a proportion of men went from 65% of men's to about 70%. But the problem is it's been kind of stuck there more or less ever since. And of course, it's worse for women of color. Their incomes are typically stuck at about 64% of the male wage. Aboriginal women are stuck at merely 46% of the male wage. So these kinds of problems and ongoing concerns led to the establishment of a federal task force. In 2004, it urged much stronger pay equity legislation. In fact, it called for pay equity legislation to be treated as a fundamental human right. And the Liberals at the time promised that they would take action to bring in some legislation. But, of course, we know that in 2006, the Harper government took over. And the Harper government, I probably don't need to tell you, has not been so sympathetic to the needs and rights of women. In fact, when Stephen Harper was head of the National Citizens Coalition in 1998, he referred to Canada's pay equity law as ridiculous. So it's not surprising that the Harper government has taken us in exactly the opposite direction, rejected the recommendations of the federal task force, and instead, in fact, stripped women in the public sector of even the pay equity coverage in the existing law. So I guess I just want to stress here that it's very important that we remember that the gigantic pay of those in the financial sector and corporate CEOs, and the relatively low pay of nurses and others in female-dominated job classifications, the difference between these has nothing to do with merit, it has nothing to do with contribution to society, and it has a lot to do with who gets to make the rules.